All right, good afternoon and welcome everyone. It's Joe Pochadiniak here with McNichol and Associates Asset Management. We're going to be continuing our discussion here about charitable giving and philanthropy. The big legacy that is important, but might not know how to do. And we're joined by a real expert today, the founder of Canada Gives, Denise Castonguay. Denise, welcome.
Hi.
Um, why don't you start off by just sort of telling us a little bit about yourself, how you started Canada Gives, why you started Canada Gives. I think for a lot of people, you get the knock at the door, or you sell, the cookies that your kids want to do for a charity. Your organization is kind of more advanced than that, but it also makes setting up a donor advised fund a lot easier, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And one of the great appeals of a donor advised fund is how easy it is and how flexible it can be. And, that appeals to, I hope, everybody. But, in the beginning of our journey here with the donor advised fund, I had come out of the investment industry, kind of from your side of the street, Joseph, on the manufacturing side. I had been there for about 5 years. And met the president of Fidelity Mutual Funds. Fidelity was a big player in the States in these donor advised funds.
Sure.
And at the
Yep.
time, they were basically unknown in Canada. I mean, I hate to say it, but often financial, products or services follow the U.S. about 15 years later. And I had certainly noticed that in this space, but it was very interesting to me because the structure of a donor advised fund is not unlike a mutual fund in that there's a legal entity and there's unit holders within it. That's kind of what a donor advised fund is in its simplest terms. That the legal entity is the public foundation, which is what Canada Gives is. And we then invite people to open their donor advised fund account under our umbrella so they don't have to go through all the headaches of registering a legal entity of their own and can benefit from having a charitable giving structure like a private foundation, but without all the hassle. So, I thought it was a great idea, and I kind of understood it in macro terms. And it certainly was growing leaps and bounds in the States because there are many factors that are very appealing about a donor advised fund in itself. So I started in 2005. It took CRA 11 months to grant registration. And trust me, no matter what you do or how good your lawyer is, they take the time they take.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, and 11 months is laser quick for CRA. Denise, one of the things, obviously the viewers can go to canadagives.ca to reach you. You note on your website offices in Toronto, Collingwood, and Edmonton.
Right.
Do the donors have to show up in person, or can this be done nowadays through Riverside, Teams, Zoom, Outlook, those sorts of applications? Does
Yes, any of those methods are fine. And certainly most people, we like to meet them at some point in the journey if they want that, but it depends what they want. And most of our donors we meet online. And, because we work through their trusted advisors, Joseph, like yourself at McNichol and Associates, and you have the relationship with them. And if you're introducing us as a potential solution for their charitable giving, then they already trust you. And so meeting us is nice, but not essential.
Yeah, I mean, like yourself, we've been in business for a little while. But from a DAF perspective, how does that discussion usually start? Like, I mean, I think with some of the things around philanthropy, and charitable giving and innovation too, it's kind of got to be in your DNA. I think in terms of doing that. So what's the usual process? People email you or call you and say, hey, I know I should be doing this. I just don't know how. What's sort of a typical week look like for yourself?
Well, because people are used to searching the internet, often they'll come to us. If they're going to come to us directly, it's because they have looked up foundations or donor advised funds or family foundations and they have found us or heard of us. But I can tell you most of the time it comes because their accountant has said, you're going to pay a big tax bill. Perhaps you'd like to set up a foundation, and then they search for us.
Right.
Or, advisors like yourself who have experience with us and think it might be a solution there that could be appealing to them and will recommend it. So, all three ways. Often, business owners who've sold their business will find us because they have the time to look. But most often it comes through professional advisors suggesting it's a solution for charitable giving.
Yeah, and you touched upon a really great point that I know is going to resonate here at McNichol is business owners. We've got lots of them. I'm sure you do too. I think there's maybe this notion that you can only make a donation personally, which you can.
Oh,
Talk to us a little bit about the how and why. Apart from the fact that when you sell a business, you usually are saddled with a pretty hefty tax bill. How you would do this at kind of a corporation level.
yeah, that's a very good question, and it is confusing to people sometimes. So you can open up a donor advised fund, certainly at Canada Gives, either as a person, as an individual, or your company could open one up. And it depends how you're going to use it, which way you want to open it, because it's not really any different, except who's in charge of making the decisions on it. Is it going to be the company, whoever is authorized at the company, making the decisions on which charity to support, which investment person to hire? Is that going to be the company making those decisions, or is it going to be John and Mary Johnson who want to set it up, and maybe John's company wants to contribute and get a tax receipt for the company? So it depends. If it's on the donation side, anybody can contribute to a donor advised fund that's been set up by an individual, and whoever makes the donation gets the tax receipt. So, holding companies, operating companies, they can make a donation, get the tax receipt, but whoever has set up that donor advised funds makes all the decisions and has all the choices on that bucket of money.
Right. And it is a bucket of money. And I think you kind of allude to an important point that we got to kind of make clear is, that's great. I think, offsetting a tax bill, you're
Right.
still donating money at the end of the day. You're parting with money that, you have to be prepared to make that decision. One of the things I learned, and I have to admit and confess that I'm quite the amateur in DAFs, although through your organization, Canada Gives, we're learning a ton about it. You can also name them because and why I say this is, I think most people watching this appreciate that life in Southern Ontario is quite expensive.
Yeah.
If you have a life insurance policy and you don't have the means to necessarily set it up now, if I understand it, you can name Canada Gives as a beneficiary in your life policy. Is that not correct?
Yes, you can name Canada Gives the beneficiary and direct it to your donor advised fund. So we do have quite a lot of insurance gifts that are part of a donor advised fund. And yeah, so Canada Gives as the charity is the beneficiary. So the tax receipt would go to the estate or however we're setting it up. But all the funds then from the life insurance proceeds would go into the donor advised fund.
Okay, that's really great. And I mean, from the that the term DAF, right, donor advised fund. So is it really I guess the donor is the one that determines where the monies are going to be gifted to, or does Canada Gives provide any sort of oversight as to that? Because the reason why I ask is sometimes you might say, oh my gosh, there's so many charities out there, I just don't know which one I want to give money to. Does your organization get involved in that, or do you require that the person setting or the business setting up the DAF pre essentially tell you who they'd like the monies to go to?
Well, different DAF providers work under different sort of responses to that question. Here at Canada Gives, we work with each donor individually, and philanthropy in our experience is very individual, very personal. So some people come to us, they already have a very defined and focused giving plan. They have charities they like, they've worked with for years, and that's great. But for most in the charitable sector through a foundation or a DAF is different than ad hoc giving as an individual. And even though they may want to have a short list of charities that they want to support, they may find it helpful we make available to them all the resources that successful foundations have used and help them become acquainted with that and what they decide if it's appropriate or not. So even if you know a charity well, you've been giving to them, you may want to drill down and get more information on specific programs and measures of success. And, typically foundations and donor advised funds make bigger gifts, multi-year gifts. And in order to do that, using tools like grant applications to kind of find out more information and gift agreements to put them in place so that what you're supporting and how they're reporting back to you, measuring impact, All of that can be outlined. We can, we can research causes and identify charities. We can research charities and identify programs. So whatever is important to each individual donor, there's lots of tools and resources here that we make available to them.
Sorry, I was on mute there. You really do all the heavy lifting. I'm just on your website, canadagives.ca, and the resources tab is very, very effective. I might add that one of the things people may or may not exactly know, and this sort of gets back to dealing with a private investment firm, is you don't have to just donate cash. You can donate, as I understand it, securities. You can donate securities in an in-kind format. And I guess that to the point about taxation, not that we want the tax tail to wag the donating dog, but if you have securities that have embedded capital gains, if you donate those, you essentially step aside or step away from the capital gains, correct?
Well, that's correct. Even with all the, furor that was earlier in the year with the change to all sorts of tax situations, charitable giving remained intact. And so, yes, donating appreciated publicly listed securities is still the most effective way to make charitable donations, like the kind we see, major gifts, big gifts.
Yeah. And again, for the viewers, we're not providing individual tax advice today, but I think that's a really, really good point to make. Now, one thing that's a little bit more, kind of getting back to that life is expensive way of thinking about it, is making donations using leverage, so credit cards, that sort of thing. Where do you stand on that? Because I guess if you have to put a charitable donation on your credit card, there might be sort of an argument that there's an affordability issue here. What do you tell donors on that side of it?
Well, we're always amazed that sometimes people want to use a credit card for a big charitable gift, but they want the points. So what can I say? It's better to make a charitable gift than not make a charitable gift. So credit cards take, they take 3 to 5% off it, and so that means that you don't get that as a tax receipt, and your charity doesn't get those that money. But I guess offsetting that, if they choose to put it into a donor advised fund, it gets invested, and your great returns will return those costs to them.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, no problem. You use the word big, and I think that's another point we should talk about. I mean, I'm familiar with giving $50 here, $50 there to someone at the front door. What is sort of the sizing in practical terms whereby setting up a DAF? Because I know you do the record keeping, and there's a lot of monitoring that your organization does, and so that to me kind of speaks to two things, sizing and we have to cross this bridge when we come to it as well, costs and fees. So talk to us a little bit about what you advise donors on that front, and then what they need to know about in terms of costing.
Well, within the donor advised fund industry, there's lots of choices, and I have to say the average is smaller than our minimum size. And because Canada Gives, I made the decision that we should be good. We should do the best we can for donors. So what's always best for the donor client is how we make decisions. But I said what's best for the not-for-profit sector as well. And in my opinion, what's best for the not-for-profit sector is if you have gifts of $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, they should really go directly to a charity. If you put them aside and invest them, and you only have to give 5% away a year, that's not making much of an impact in the not-for-profit sector. So, the really benefit of setting up a structure, whether it's a private foundation or donor advised fund, is that money's then invested. It can grow and add more charitable dollars to be given away later. But, so the minimum in our case is $100,000, and I can tell you that people can add to it. It can grow over time. That's very common. CRA has a minimum for foundations that donor advised funds follow, and that's 5% a year. At $100,000, you're giving away $5,000 a year to charity, which is not insignificant. But at $10,000, that would be $50. So why not make a $10,000 gift?
Yeah, and I think to your point, about the $100,000. I mean, that is a big number. But by the same token, you go and sell a business, or you have a whole life policy. It's not outrageous, and I think we have to kind of make a line in the sand has to be drawn as to again, to your point. I mean, $5,000. There's some sort of tangible difference that you
Yeah,
can associate with that.
yeah,
Giving a dollar or two. I mean, that's certainly well intentioned and every bit
yeah.
helps. But again, from practical purposes, there's going to be some costing that gets into that. So, um, now we I think you alluded to it, but again, the administrative fees are kind of so it's not, just to be clear, CRA regulates more on the tax side.
Yes.
There's no group per se regulating costs. Every organization is free to charge what they need to do to make the numbers work, right?
Well, that's correct. And, there's perhaps CRA should be more involved in that. But, they do have sort of guidelines for charities. So don't forget to offer donor advised fund, we have to be a charity because, that's all we do is this. So we're a registered charity.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and we can actually see your CRA charity numbers, so that's all
Yeah.
understood. Yeah.
So, we're not an investment firm doing this as a secondary line of business. All we are is a charity. And so, CRA does have guidelines on charities and how much the maximum they'll allow for fundraising expenses. The maximum they before they start scrutinizing you, they'll allow for administration costs. So there are some broad guidelines, and those are higher than you'd like to know, frankly. And we help our clients look at that kind of information when they're choosing charities and to see if that's important to them or not. But they should be aware of all those kind of things because if you're donating $1,000 and 800 of that's being used in costs, that's not very good.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Well. Yeah. That's. I mean. Believe me, as a portfolio manager, I can completely understand those mathematics. Denise, what yeah, I'm aware of organizations like the Heart and Stroke
Right.
Foundation, that sort of thing. What would you say are like the top three groups that people give to? And in your experience, are you aware of, maybe kind of, I don't want to use the term wrong, but maybe groups that more people should consider donating to because of the caliber and scope of work that they do? You ever deal with that?
Well, we do a lot actually. And while we try to support people's own choices, we do provide some insight and direction, and if they ask for it, recommendations.
Hmm.
But people are different. Some people like to give to grassroots charities that are struggling, and their money's really going to make a difference
Yeah.
to help that organization. Some people are more comfortable with the large organizations, but we do, because we can run these research reports, we have a charity research tool that donors could run on their own, or we can do that for them. But you can tell if they've got, if they have $600 million set aside in an endowment, maybe you don't need to direct it to their endowment. Maybe you should direct it somewhere else.
Yeah, I'd say
So,
600 million is quite enough, right? So,
yeah, so, so you have to understand some of those things, and we just point them out. They can make their own decisions. So, I mean, I can tell you by category, sort of by asset class within the charitable sector where people are focused, and healthcare always is number one as a broad general
sure.
class. I mean, there's so many areas of healthcare, but post-COVID too, healthcare is getting more support than ever,
Yeah.
and probably should. Education has always been number two, but we see more things like food banks and stuff happening now, which is, which can fall under churches, it can fall under other kinds of charities. They can, so it's hard to kind of see that sometimes, but they get a lot of attention. We do so, I mean, and COVID did a lot of good that way because it focused the light on needs that weren't as supported as they probably could or should be, like homelessness and like mental health. So
Yeah.
all of those types of charities, we've seen such an increase in support kind of in those areas.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's good to hear that. It's unfortunate, but it is good to hear that now, those important areas that you touched upon are getting the attention they need and the resources that they need. Just maybe going more broadly, going more globally. What, if you were a teacher and you had to assign a letter grade to Canada overall in the context of charitable giving and philanthropy, what would that letter be, and where do you think there's room for improvement?
Well, interesting enough, because we have this reputation globally of being nice people, and I think we are nice. But I remember when I first started, I was at a luncheon, and a fellow came up from the States that did a report on Canada versus the U.S., right? In the U.S., and we actually did very poorly, and it's because we have a very strong social safety network in the fabric of our culture. And so often people think, well, there's government programs, there's social programs that are set up through government agencies, and they don't give as highly as they do in the US. It's
Right.
noticeable.
Okay. I
Yeah.
never, of course, now that you said it, it does kind of make sense, right? A lot of Canadians take the perspective of, well, I am contributing to this. It's called my, T1 tax,
Yeah. Well, yeah.
paying taxes. So I understand that too, but that's an interesting
It's
little.
an interesting sociological
It is.
project,
Yeah.
and I can't say that it's wrong because we have a lovely social fabric here, but it doesn't mean we're not philanthropic. It means the urgency probably isn't felt, or the individual responsibility isn't felt as much.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit just briefly about some of the mechanics. I notice you have an online client portal. By the way, we do as well. What would your donors see in terms of that online portal? I guess it's just a reporting and tracking type of mechanism. Is that what it would?
No, it's much more than that, but of course it is that as well. So, we keep all of the reports that we do, the foundation reports we do quarterly are there since inception. The tax receipts are there in case you might have lost one or want to remember. So
Yeah.
they're all filed there. In addition, we file with every charitable grant that's requested and funded from the DAF, we send a custom letter to the charity. So all those letters are there. Because sometimes people want to look back and say, what did I support last year? Or, anyway, all of the letters to charities for every single gift that's made is there. In addition, we do a total, what we call a charitable grants report every year that's posted there. So if you've been having a DAF for 10 years, we do a summary every year end that says, look at how much you've given to each charity and in total. And that's kind of cool. People sometimes use that report to show their kids that the family's actually making a difference in the not-for-profit sector. It makes it a reality because nobody keeps track from year to year of what you're doing, but we keep track.
Yeah.
And on that, we also have the charity research tool, which is all 87,000 CRA charities. It's the whole database, and we've put filters in so you could search either by charity name or by cause or by subcategory or do all those kind of filters so that you can find charities that you might find interest and press a button, you get a report on that charity.
Right. That's great because I remember when my when again back to my father. I mean I know he was contributing within his means, and it was just sort of kind of a nice feeling to see that, made you feel like he was doing well, not just looking after all of us and
Yeah.
family, but others as well. One thing I just want to point out, just so that people don't get confused, is one of the things you talk about in terms of Canada Gives is Canada Gives has a quote. Well, it's not a quote. It's actually a duty to monitor. And just to be
Yeah.
clear, that's to monitor the DAF, not the underlying investment. So you're not providing securities advice in terms of this stock is better or
No,
we're
no,
going
no, no,
to
no.
that kind of thing. You're monitoring holistically the DAF itself.
Yes, we're just, as
Yeah.
a fiduciary, we're just overseeing the asset mix. We're overseeing maybe the costs. We're overseeing, we provide that third party oversight. That's all. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this has been really informative, Denise. I really appreciate it. I know I'm sure you're very busy, so thanks for making the time. Any sort of final comments that you would offer to anybody watching this who's just learned about DAFs for the first time? I know you mentioned that the Canadian system's about 15 years behind the U.S. system, but any sort of parting words?
Well, there's lots of benefits. People will say to me, what's the benefit of giving through a foundation or donor advised fund versus directly to a charity? And there's lots of different benefits. And one of the big ones is that you can get your family involved at some point along the journey if that's important to you. And there's all sorts of different ways we see that. Sometimes people will just sit down at Thanksgiving and say, okay, we have this foundation, mom and dad set up this foundation account and we have $10,000 to give away every year. And they give $2,500 to each kid and $2,500 to mom and dad. And then they talk about which charities they want to support. Or maybe we have one donor who it's their grandchildren at Christmas that pick charities, and that's very fun. And to get families involved, even at that young level, I mean, it's really cute to see their choices. They're so different than mom and dad's. But there's lots of different ways to get families involved. Some people roll out kiddie accounts, we call them, sort of junior DAF accounts for each individual, son or daughter, and they have their own.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, right? Like it's like us, we like meeting people's children. We want to teach them about the process of saving and investing. Most parents will teach and share with their children the importance of education. So we
Yeah.
talked about that, and then groups like yours, from an early age can actually come in and talk about and advise about the importance of charitable giving. So that's great. Well, Denise, this was a lot of fun. I want to thank you again for your time, as well
My
as
pleasure.
my colleague Ken Reid for making sure the technicals are working. Denise Astengay is the founder and chief executive officer of Canada Gives, with offices in Toronto, Collingwood, and Edmonton. You can also check her out online at www.canadagives.ca. So thanks very much, Denise, and
Thanks, Joseph.
forward to